When we think of rural Australia, traditionally it was wheat and sheep that really was agricultural or farming Australia's major products. These have changed a fair bit in recent years, to the point where the beef industry is very substantial, and also creeping into the cropping area are a lot more grain crops and broadacre crops than simply wheat. In this unit, what we're going to do is introduce you to the profile, if you like, of Australian cropping. Broadacre, sometimes referred now by very metricated people as broad hectare cropping. Basically, enterprises that grow crops on a large area, usually on geographically boring terrain, because it's a lot easier to operate farming machinery on flat land. While we might talk about wheat as the traditional grain crop from Australia, now there are several others of significance, including barley, oats, rice, and so on. And you'll be reading about those as you go through the study guide. Also in broadacre cropping are oilseed crops. This is largely followed on the rising popularity of vegetable oils in cooking and other processes. And of these, canola stands out as one of the more significant. In the study guide, we basically introduce you to the history and profile of broadacre cropping in Australia. And what it presents really is a profile of the industry. Now, the methods of production vary by crop, which I guess makes a certain amount of sense. There's also a certain amount of interchange between crops and active farm management to maximise the property's production based on a rotation of crops. And so you'll have wheat grown for a season, followed by, say, an oilseed crop. Sometimes there will be double cropping, or really double planting, which consists of growing more than one plant in a paddock at a particular time. This is an interesting possibility because it relies on the chemical and physical correspondences or compatibilities between different crops. The southeast of New South Wales and the Riverina area and so on is a good area to look at the double cropping. It's important to get an idea of what kind of production is most effective for a particular district, and generally you'll find that in broadacre cropping situations, a district will have a fairly established profile of what works best. In the study guide, we show some general maps of the distribution of a couple of the major crops, principally wheat, but it comes down to looking at the local optimum land use. In some cases, land use can be optimized by rotating crop production, say wheat or canola or something else, with sheep grazing. And so you can spell a property by putting it out for pasture, and then after a few seasons or even a season, bring it back into crop production. These come down to more advanced management techniques. What we're looking at in this study guide in covering this industry is really focusing, though, on the economics of broadacre production. You'll notice as you read through the study guide, we have some statistics on the overall production levels and also typical farm productivity. And that's rather an important aspect. It's a good way of reminding us that the whole purpose of investing in productive real estate, and rural land is a specialised form of income producing property, the object is to produce an income, a profit, a revenue for the owner. In the case of Broadacre Farms, that will either be a farming business, a corporation, or a private farming owner, a family. The number of family farms is reducing year by year as they're being replaced by corporate structures, but it's still an important part of the industry. It also gives us an idea of scale. And when you reflect on this, you can give some thought to the way that if you were thinking about buying a broadacre property for the purpose of becoming a farmer, or maybe you are already, what will partly condition your choice of purchase is the net income that you're likely to derive from operating that property. And that's scaled to the income needs for a family. And we, depending on the area, can set numbers on that. And I invite you, especially when you go through Table 2 in the study guide, to reflect on what income you would consider reasonable if you were farming a broadacre property. The advantage of grain production compared to some other forms of rural activity, dairying is probably the most extreme example, is the distribution of labour requirements over time. There are a number of functions involved in cropping, planting, sometimes weed control, harvesting are probably the major ones. In between that, often there is time for other activities, and it's a rising trend in Australian rural country for people to rely more and more on what we refer to as off-farm incomes. And you'll notice that's also mentioned in the statistics that you'll find in Table 2 in the study guide. And this all comes down ultimately to the lifestyle, if you like, or the standard of living that you're buying when you buy a farm. And so if you look at that, it helps you to, I guess, probably calibrate the forms of valuation or the dimensions of valuation, especially calibrating it around the needs of a family for income. There is a lot more in the study guide. We talk about various environmental issues and so on. When we move down, though, to the practicalities of valuation, we can come back to the almost traditional issues. We're going to be looking for comparables. Nice thing about broadacre farming is that often the land is relatively uniform, and those differences are usually encapsulated in the simple variable of the yield per unit of area, acre or hectare. In the study guide, we just mention some of the typical, both common, colloquial measures that are used for cropping productivity, and also their metric equivalents, which we're moving into. It helps you to get a bit of an idea of the language which is used in different land uses, and that's important. So from a valuer's point of view, we're going to be looking at dollars per hectare and working with comparable sales, because there's probably, in most cases, an easier delineation between productive and non-productive land. The non-productive land often is relatively marginal, uncleared or what have you. That makes the valuation task a little more straightforward. We can use as a check method measures based on production levels, and production levels, tonnes per hectare and so on, but also gross tonnage production, likely through the cycle, perennially, from the property, and work out a dollar value on that basis. Like all areas of rural valuation, local knowledge is absolutely paramount to understanding the appropriate methods and so on. And the best way to get local knowledge is to have the opportunity to work with local valuers. And so I recommend that if you're considering valuing a broadacre cropping property, definitely go out with a local valuer who has expertise in the area. Learn as much as you can from the, if you like, local language and the local production characteristics, the local issues, whether it's to do with climate or disease or what have you. I think that just about covers the topic from the point of view of what's needed to understand. You will find, or you'll probably be noticing, that there is a certain similarity that is starting to come into these different forms of land use. The first is the importance of understanding the land use, the terminology, the particular local characteristics, say the varieties and species and so on. Here we might be talking about different species of wheat or other crops. If we're talking about pastoral activities, we'll be talking about different breeds of cattle or sheep and so on. So you need to understand the industry. The next is really to concentrate on what measures of comparison you're going to use, and then really apply them. So it's a fairly straightforward formula that will operate across most land uses. With broadacre cropping operations, it depends on how the property is being sold, because it's not uncommon for properties to have a fair bit of plant and machinery, and it's a matter of how mobile that is, whether it's coming as part of the property and so on, and really appreciating the impact of plant machinery on the overall value of the property.